you're like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? How could you think that? That's clearly not the truth. I just, well, like I've been following this all week, and my people haven't said that at all. Well, that's because of media bias, and that's because you're stuck in a bubble, and you got to get out of it and use your mind and make up your own mind. So this is how media bias affects society and how you can counter it. Table of contents. So the purpose of this presentation is to show where people get their news from, how those news organizations are biased, and how news organizations influence political opinions, how to avoid biases and ingest news objectively. It's important for the consumer to get objective facts about a story before they form an opinion. Otherwise, they will be misinformed. So here are some social media statistics. So as you can see from this graph, digital media has far surpassed any other use of media. Digital media is where people get their news from nowadays. Social media is like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So yeah, you can see there, digital is much higher than everything else. So a study done by HAL titled Social Clicks, What and Who Gets Read on Twitter analyzes some behavior of Twitter users and how and why articles get shared / clicked. So this was a huge meta study. There's tons of data collected, and they're pretty much just trying to see how articles get shared and why they get clicked on, how things go viral. So one of the more interesting things that I found in this study was that a majority of URLs, 50 to 70%, are not clicked before they're shared. So what that means is people are reading headlines and looking at the picture and then sharing the article 50 to 70% of the time. So that's really alarming. You know, that means that people are getting their news from these articles and they're not even reading what's inside the article before sharing it with other people. Based on what we know about media bias from news organizations, this means people are basing their political opinions on almost no actual information. It's alarming. So this is a graph that shows the media bias of the most popular news organizations. So the news is a monopoly. 90% of the news is run by 6 companies. So that's, you know, like all the, like Fox News or CNN, they have sister and brother companies that are underneath them that they own, right? So this just shows the bias, kind of visualizes it. On the right is the right Republican sort of ideology slant, and on the left is the liberal Democrat ideology slant. So this is just showing that there are biases, and we can see. So this leads to reporting stories in biased ways that appeal to their audience and monetary funders. So when they're reporting a story, they have to be careful, think about who's funding them, you know, what their goals are, and also they have to think about their audience because they don't want to lose their audience. So they will report stories based on their funders and their audience's biases, right? So figure 2 visualizes the political slants of the consumers of these news organizations. Knowing that these companies appeal to their audiences, they will report news to fit the biases of their audiences. So media companies use reporting tactics to make a story look a certain way. Statement bias, also called presentation bias, is concerned with how articles choose to report on concepts. So this is practices of news organizations, the way that they present the information in stories, either holding back on things that will make their funders and their audiences unhappy, or focusing in on things that might not be as important but are known to get more clicks, or shock and make them more money. So a good example of how news organizations with different ideological slants will report on a story was during the 2021 Black Lives Matter protests. Here we can see an example of CNN's news coverage. CNN is the most prominent news organization on the left, the liberal Democrat side. When reporting on the BLM demonstrations, they would use words like peaceful and protest, and they would only show the peaceful footage, right? So here we see, St. Louis couple pulls gun on protesters. So this is obviously crazy. You see these two crazy white people pointing in their big mansion, pointing guns at protesters. So this is going to CNN's audience loves this. They love to hate it. This is what's going to get clicks and shares, and they focus in on stories like this. So on the other side, we have Fox News coverage. Fox News is the most prominent news organization on the right side of the political spectrum. When reporting on the BLM demonstrations, they would use words like violent and riot, and they would only show footage of fires and chaos. So they're painting the protesters as the enemy, and the other side is painting the cops or the anti-protesters as the enemy. So we can see two different news organizations, two completely different ways of reporting the same story, right? So who's right? Well, it's all subjective, and the best we can do is get quality information from reliable sources and make up our own minds. We can see how somebody's stuck in an echo chamber. An echo chamber is when you're only getting one side of the story, like you're only following one side of the story. They're only watching one side, would have a completely different understanding of what is the truth than somebody watching only on the other side. So you're like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? How could you think that? That's clearly not the truth. I've been following this all week, and my people haven't said that at all. Well, that's because of media bias, and that's because you're stuck in a bubble, and you got to get out of it and use your mind and make up your own mind. So, effects of media bias. Public opinion based on ideology, not facts. So news is ideological, not factual, most of the time. 90% of the news is run by 6 companies, and those 6 companies are very, very biased in how they report news. So most of the time when you're reading a news article, it is not factual. You have to kind of follow the source and figure it out yourself. Spread of misinformation. So since these articles are not factual most of the time, and people aren't even reading the article, they're just sharing it based on the clickbait headline, this causes the spread of misinformation, right? It causes stories that are not true to spread virally because they're shock worthy, or they got a good kick to it. Further divide between people with different political opinions. So we see how hostile the political environment has become in the last 4 or 5 years. The right and left hate each other. The further you get, the more you hate the other side. And, that's a bad effect. So this is a quote. Despite the rise of social media, news articles published by well-established media outlets remain the primary source of information on current events. Thus, if the reporting of a news outlet is biased, readers are prone to adopting similarly biased views. Today, the effects of biased coverage are amplified by social media, in which readers tend to follow only the news that conforms with their established views and beliefs. So this is a good quote, because they're saying exactly what I'm saying. News organizations are biased. Okay. People get their news from social media, and we know the people using social media don't read the articles. So they're getting their news based off of a headline and a picture, essentially. And there's no information in that. Like, it's just not, it's not a good thing. So what can you do to counter this? So you can read the article. Inside the article, you will find further context, which will give you more information to shape your opinion properly. Okay. Follow the source. So usually the article will contain a source. This is where the author of the article got the information from. You can read from the source, and the information you are getting will not be tainted by the author's biases. So if you're reading a news article and it says a study from here said this, and then it has one sentence from the study, and then the rest of it is just the author's opinion, I mean, that means nothing. Like, go look at the study. Most of the time it's completely taken out of context, the sentence that they said. And if they don't link a study, then it's completely worthless. Like, if they say the study and they don't link it, you're getting your news from someone's opinion, not something that's actually happening. It's someone's opinion on something that's happening, right? It's like a big game of telephone. Like, once it reaches the end, it's like, who knows how true it is, right? Find unbiased sources. So the best way to ingest objective information is to get your news from an unbiased source, a source that is not appealing to anybody. Okay, a source that is just trying to report. They're just trying to report. There's no objective. They don't have funders. They don't have a big audience. So, it's really hard to find. I don't know if there is an actual news organization that's big that does that, but there is a website called All Sides, which shows you all the different reports on one page. So when a story comes out, you'll have Fox, CNN, like Washington Post, like all these places reporting on it. It'll show you on one page what everybody said, and you can see how completely different the reports are from these different news organizations. You can see the biases in real time. And when you have both sides of the story, it's a little bit easier to come to the middle, and the middle is usually where the truth lies most of the time. So conclusions. News organizations are biased. These biases shape the political and ideological opinions of consumers. Most people get their news from articles on social media, and most people share an article before reading the content. So you can find good quality. You should find good quality sources, find facts, read everything, and read it objectively. Think for yourself, and keep in mind that news organizations are not telling you the complete truth most of the time. Don't hate others for their opinions. Understand that most people are stuck in an echo chamber and that their opinions are manufactured by these media organizations. Always search for the truth. Some citations, references, and that's the end. Thanks.